The other day, one of the viewers on my YouTube channel about fighter kiting asked me about Korean fighter kites. He wanted to know how I make them and to show him how I do it. Well, a Korean fighter kite is something that I don't get questions about. He's the first one that I can remember. But a Korean fighter kite's a fabulous kite. It's a rectangular kite. In this one, I'm going to make it 14 and a quarter tall and 11 and a quarter inches wide. And the hole in the center, which is a traditional part of a Korean fighter kite, I'm going to make 3 inches in diameter. Now, you can make a Korean fighter kite in almost any dimension you want, but these dimensions are very, very close to the proportions that are typically used for the length and the width of the kite. The hole diameter is typically 1/3, the diameter is 1/3 the actual width of the kite. Now, in my case, it's a little less than 1/3 of that width, but I did that on purpose because as the hole gets a little smaller, the kite in flight becomes faster, but also less predictable. So I decided I would make it a little bit smaller than the traditional sized hole and see how I like the way it flies. This point down here is 3 5/8 inches from the trailing edge here, measured up. That is where the lower bridle point normally would go. Now this is another variable. You can put it here, you can put it lower, you can put it higher, you can put it at the center of the crossbars, and each time you move it, the kite flight behavior will change. And you just need to play around with it until you come to a point where you like it best. Keep it there. Pretty simple, really. So I'm going to try it starting here. Now, normally on a rectangular kite, I fly quite often a Japanese version of a rectangular kite called a buka. And this is 15 inches wide, 10 inches tall. And this is a wrinkled polyfilm sail that I made. And it's all carbon fiber, all 0.05 inch diameter carbon fiber rod. But one of the characteristics of a rectangular kite, or a square one for that matter, is that when you fly them, you have to put a bend or a bow in the leading edge. So you have to have a tension line that allows for that adjustment. And so when the kite's ready to fly, this is how it looks. Now, the same is true for a Korean kite. The difference, though, is that the leading edge on a Korean kite is the short end of the kite. And it has a hole in the middle, which a buka can, but doesn't typically have. Now, in this case, I'm not going to make it the traditional way. The traditional way is using rice paper, washi, for the sail material, and shaping specific sized spars from bamboo for each of the spars in the kite. I'm going to use carbon fiber for all the spars, And I'm using this particular piece of sail material that I cut out is something called Orcon. It's a polyfilm with a ripstop scrid built into it, so it's a little more durable. So I'm using it and carbon fiber rods. I'm using 0.05-inch diameter carbon fiber rods for all of the spars except one, and that is the crossbar at the center of the kite, which is very, very flexible. It's a 0.03 diameter carbon fiber rod. It's like a wet noodle almost, but it is traditionally used in a Korean kite. And when they're traditionally made using bamboo, this particular spar is very, very thin and very flexible. So I'm following that tradition using carbon fiber instead. Now, one of the things that is a little bit challenging sometimes for people is how to get the spars aligned with a kite before you actually secure them to the kite's sail. One of the little tips that I use, or ideas I use, this is a piece of tubing, plastic heat shrink tubing that's the diameter large enough to allow me to put the 0.05-inch diameter carbon rods into it. So why would I want that? Well, when I build the kite, this is the spine, and this is the leading edge spar. I want to be able to align those correctly when I make the kite, and I want them to stay that way. So I put this little piece of heat shrink tubing up here in order to do that. And what I did was I took a piece of this tubing and I put a pin in it and ran the pin through the tubing. So I punctured the tubing, and I did that so it would allow the leading edge spar to go in and through it so that it would become a T to allow me to properly align the spine to the leading edge. Now on the ends of the leading edge spar, I put additional pieces of tubing that are just bent over, and I put the crossbars in order to align them properly to the shape of the sail before I attach them. So it's just a way I use to allow an easy positioning of all the spars before I actually permanently attach them. Now I made a hem of about 3/8 of an inch here that I'm going to fold over and use contact cement to glue when I'm finally finished with the kite. So these are the parts. I have the crossbar at the center, which is 0.03-inch diameter carbon fiber. And I have the spine right here. And I have the leading edge and I have 2 crossbars. So altogether, we have 5 spars that will look like this when it's all done. Or at least close. Now, I put these little yellow pieces on the leading edge, as you can see here, and they are heat shrink tubing also, but these I glued in place. I measured and glued them. These 2 here, I'm going to experiment with the bridle. And the upper bridle, I'll use these 2 as an alternative, but I'll start out using these over here on each end. One of these yellow ones is for the tension line, and one of them is for the bridle. Now I use stops because I don't like to glue my bridle line to the spar. I don't like that. I like the bridle line to be able to rotate around the spar based on the angle and attitude of the kite. I'm not sure that's important, but that's what I like to do, so that's what I'm going to do here. Now you can glue them if you want. Most kite makers do glue them. Seems to work fine. Super glue works great. So I'm going to attach the spars now, and then I will show you that I'll put the leading edge, I'll glue the leading edge next. Well, I finished this kite. I put the bridle on and a tension line here. I use a taut line hitch as my adjustable knot. It's a relatively easy knot to tie, and it's very reliably adjustable, so I can change the tension on the leading edge. And then I decided to just tape the spars to the sail. And I hope that's going to be sufficient. And I started with a bridle located where traditionally the bridle is attached, which is near the corners of the leading edge. Now I've made 2 other holes here for a bridle that's closer than this to the center, thinking that maybe I'd prefer it. I don't know. I'll have to see when I fly it. And then I put the lower bridle point right here, which is a little bit higher, a little bit closer to the center of the kite than it called for. But this is the final product, and it looks like it has a few wrinkles in it. That could be because of the tape job I did, which may not have been too perfect, or some other slight distortion. But I've noticed that in my kites that have wrinkles, the wrinkles don't very often affect the flight of the kite. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. So I'm hopeful that this time will be one of those times when the wrinkles won't matter. So I used this plastic cup for my guide for my hole. I just picked it because I had it, and that's the size I chose. And you can use anything you want to make the hole size, but that's how you approach making a Korean fighter kite. And I hope you try it. And if you're able to have available bamboo and you want to work with bamboo and form the spars the way that they're supposed to be, you'd have a beautiful flying kite for sure, especially if you used a rice paper sail. Now, the rice paper sail is a little stiffer material than this polyfilm here. So it will have a little different fight characteristic. So I could put this, generally speaking, you just want a little bit of a bow in the leading edge. Enough so that when you measure the tips, tip to tip, it measures the same as the tip to tip trailing edge. Because when you start out, the sail is actually cut so that these are about a ½ inch wider than the trailing edge. And the reason is that to allow for this bending. So I hope that helps. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And if I know the answers, I'll be happy to share them with you.